What were the Crusades? The Crusades were a series of military campaigns promoted by the Catholic Church between the 11th and 13th centuries, whose main objective was to recover Jerusalem and the sacred territories from the hands of the Muslims. These expeditions, considered holy wars, were called by the Pope and included the participation of nobles, knights, and Christian pilgrims from Europe. Although their initial purpose was religious, the Crusades also involved political, territorial, and economic motivations, and resulted in the creation of the Crusader states in the Holy Land, as well as in episodes of conflict between Christians and Muslims, and between Latin, Catholic, and Byzantine, Orthodox Christianity. Before we begin, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay up to date with our latest content. In this video, we'll dive deep into what happened during the First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. What was the historical context in which the First Crusade took place? The First Crusade was a key event in medieval history, and it happened in a very particular context. Europe at that time was divided into kingdoms and fiefs, where kings and nobles constantly competed for power and expansion of their territories. The feudal system, which organized society into strict hierarchies, generated tensions, especially in a Europe that was beginning to experience a population increase. This phenomenon of overpopulation in the 11th century brought with it additional pressure on agricultural resources and available land, which aggravated tensions between feudal lords, who sought new lands to support their followers and expand their influence. A key factor intensifying these tensions was the existence of landless nobles, a consequence of the right of primogeniture. According to this system, only the eldest son inherited the family lands, while the younger sons were left without property and therefore had to seek their fortune through military service, wars, or entering the clergy. This situation pushed many young nobles to join military campaigns to gain land and status, which generated a constant climate of violence and conquest within the Christian kingdoms. Rather than fighting external enemies, knights and feudal lords often led their armies against other Christians in search of land, castles, and resources, leading to internal wars and struggles for feudal control. In an attempt to control this growing violence, the Catholic Church introduced movements such as the Peace of God and the Truce of God. The Peace of God, Pax Dei, was an ecclesiastical initiative that began in the late 10th century with the purpose of protecting the most vulnerable in society, such as peasants, clergy, women, and children, from the devastating effects of feudal warfare. The Church attempted to limit harm to the innocent, and those who violated the peace of God were threatened with excommunication, which meant being expelled from the Christian community, a much-feared penalty in medieval Europe. The Truce of God, Truga Dei, for its part, sought to reduce violence by imposing temporary restrictions on wars. It prohibited hostilities on certain days of the week, particularly weekends, and during key liturgical periods such as Lent and Advent, as well as other holy days. These initiatives not only served a religious purpose but also helped protect crops and the local economy, allowing agricultural production and trade to develop without constant interruptions. From an economic and political point of view, the Peace of God and the Truce of God benefited the peasants and the Church, since they reduced the number of conflicts and looting, which made it possible to maintain order in the lands controlled by feudal and ecclesiastical lords. For the nobles, however, these measures limited their opportunities to expand their territories and make profits through war and plunder within Europe. The Catholic Church after the Schism of 1054. The Catholic Church in 11th century Europe was not only one of the most spiritually powerful institutions, but also one of the main political and territorial forces. The Pope exerted significant influence over Christians, acting not only as a religious leader, but also as a leading political figure. The Church owned vast lands throughout Europe, acquired through donations from nobles and monarchs, making it a large feudal landowner. These territories, among which the Papal States in Italy were the most prominent, were under their direct control. And like any other feudal lord, the Church had the right to collect tributes and rents from the peasants living in its domains. In addition, Christians had to pay tithes, a tax equivalent to 10% of their production, which was used to maintain ecclesiastical institutions and finance initiatives such as the Crusades. However, in 1054, just a few decades before the First Crusade, the Great Schism occurred between the Western, Catholic, and Eastern, Orthodox churches, an event that fractured the unity of Christianity and partly reduced the territorial and economic power of the Catholic Church. As a result of this schism, the Catholic Church lost much of its influence in the eastern territories of the Byzantine Empire, and its power was limited in that part of the world. The Schism weakened papal control over the whole of Christendom and left the Church more vulnerable to external threats, such as the advances of the Seljuk Turks in the east. On the other side of the Mediterranean, the Byzantine Empire, an Eastern Christian empire, was in a critical situation. Although at its peak it had been a dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean, by the late 11th century its territory and military power had been weakened by successive defeats at the hands of the Seljuk Turks, a Muslim group that had emerged from Central Asia and in recent decades had begun to aggressively expand westward. The Seljuks, who had adopted Islam, managed to conquer much of the Byzantine territory in Asia Minor, one of the most important and richest regions of the empire, which represented a direct threat to the survival of Constantinople, the imperial capital. By the end of the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire was in a position of relative weakness. Internal strife, rebellions, and loss of territory had undermined the emperor's ability to defend the empire's borders. It was in this context that the Emperor Alexius I Comnenus, who had ascended to the throne in 1081 and was attempting to stabilize the empire, decided that he could not face the Turkish invaders alone. Alexius I decided to seek help from the West, something that had until then been unusual due to tensions between the Church of Rome and the Orthodox Church. In 1095, the emperor sent emissaries to Pope Urban II, requesting military assistance to fight the Turks and recover lost territories. Alexius hoped that the Pope would send him mercenary troops or nobles willing to fight in defense of Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire. What Alexius probably did not anticipate was that his request would spark a mass movement in Europe that would result in the Crusades. At the same time, the holiest regions for Christians, such as Jerusalem, had fallen under Muslim control since the 7th century, when the Umayyad Caliphate conquered the city. Despite this, for several centuries, Christians were able to continue making pilgrimages to the holy places, especially to the Holy Sepulchre, where according to Christian tradition, Jesus Christ was crucified and resurrected. However, the situation began to deteriorate with the arrival of the Seljuk Turks, who not only dominated Jerusalem, but also controlled the routes that pilgrims had to travel to reach the city. The journey to the Holy Land became increasingly dangerous. Christian pilgrims, who had previously traveled in relative safety, began to face assaults and attacks by bandits and hostile Muslim groups. Faced with this panorama of Turkish invasions, threats to Constantinople and difficulties for pilgrims, Pope Urban II saw an opportunity not only to help the Byzantine Empire, but also to unite Christianity under a common cause and restore Christian control over the holy places. The Council of Clermont. At the Council of Clermont in November 1095, Pope Urban II delivered an impassioned speech that changed the course of medieval history. In his appeal, he urged Western Christians to take up arms to liberate Jerusalem and protect pilgrims heading to the Holy Land. Urban II presented the war as a just and sacred cause, appealing to the religious fervor of the time, and promised those who participated in the crusade plenary indulgences, the forgiveness of all sins, both those committed and those that could be committed, assuring the crusaders a spiritual reward and eternal salvation, igniting the fervor of the audience. With words like "God wills it," Latin, Deus vult, Urban inspired a mass mobilization of nobles, knights, and peasants, who saw in the crusade not only an opportunity to serve God, but also a chance for personal redemption. However, Urban II's call was not only a response to religious motives, or to a request for help from the Byzantine Emperor Alexius III Comnenus. The Pope also saw in the Crusades a strategic opportunity to resolve several internal problems affecting Europe, such as internal violence between feudal nobles and knights, who frequently fought each other over territories. The Crusade offered a way to channel that violence toward a common external enemy, venting tensions within Europe and strengthening unity under the leadership of the Church. Furthermore, participation in the Crusade offered nobles and knights a material promise: the possibility of acquiring lands in the East, which was particularly attractive for second-born sons and those nobles who did not have lands of their own due to the laws of primogeniture. The Crusade was thus seen not only as a holy war, but as an economic solution for those in Europe who lacked the means, while also offering the opportunity to alleviate the problems of overpopulation affecting some regions of the continent. On the other hand, from an ecclesiastical perspective, a successful crusade also represented an opportunity for the Catholic Church to regain spiritual influence and territorial power that it had lost as a result of the Schism of 1054. The call and organization in Europe, 1095 to 1096. Following the call of Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont in November 1095, a wave of religious fervor and enthusiasm for the Crusade swept across Europe. Nobles, knights, and peasants began to organize to undertake the journey to the east, motivated by the promise of plenary indulgences and the opportunity to conquer new lands. In Europe, contingents for the First Crusade began to form mainly in France, the Holy Roman Empire, and Italy. The main leaders who emerged to lead the crusading forces were Godfrey of Bouillon, nobleman of Lorraine, one of the most respected leaders; Bohemond of Taranto, Norman prince who ruled southern Italy; Raymond IV of Toulouse, Count of Toulouse, one of the first to join; Hugo of Vermandois, brother of the King of France. The Crusader contingents began to gather at different points in Europe during the year 1996. Although the popular crusade, led by Peter the Hermit, had set out earlier, its failure soon highlighted the need for greater organization. The official Crusader forces began marching east in the spring and summer of 1096, the march to Constantinople, 1096 to 1097. The various Crusader contingents marched separately from their places of origin in Europe to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the meeting point for the expedition. Emperor Alexius and Comnenus had requested military aid from Pope Urban II, but the size of the Crusader forces and their disorganized arrival caused some tension between the Byzantines and the Crusaders. Alexius, concerned about the true intentions of the Crusaders, tried to control the situation. The Crusader leaders were welcomed in Constantinople and asked to swear loyalty to the emperor, promising to return any territories they reconquered from the Muslims. Although some leaders such as Bohemond accepted, others, such as Raymond IV of Toulouse, were reluctant. After arriving in Constantinople between November 1096 and April 1097, the Crusaders were transported by Alexius across the Bosphorus into Asia Minor, where they faced the Seljuk Turks. The Siege of Nicaea, May-July 1097. The first major battle of the First Crusade occurred at the city of Nicaea, a key fortress controlled by the Seljuk Turks and located near the Sea of Marmara. The Crusaders arrived outside Nicaea in May 1097 and began the siege. Kili Arslan I, the Sultan of the Seljuk Turks, had underestimated the power of the Crusaders and had sent his forces on another campaign. This left Nicaea poorly defended at first. However, seeing the magnitude of the Crusader army, Kili Arslan attempted to come to the aid of the city, but his forces were defeated by the Crusaders. The siege lasted until July 1097, when Nicaea finally surrendered. Interestingly, the city was not taken directly by the Crusaders, but was handed over to Byzantine forces under a secret agreement between Emperor Alexius and the Turkish defenders, causing resentment among the Crusaders. The Battle of Dorylaeum, July 1, 1097. After the capture of Nicaea, the Crusaders continued their march through Asia Minor. In mid-June, the army split into two columns to advance more quickly. The advanced column, led by Bohemond of Taranto, was attacked by Kilij Arslan's army at Dorylaeum on July 1, 1097. In this battle, the Seljuk Turks used light cavalry tactics, raining arrows on the Crusaders and quickly retreating. Bohemond's column, surrounded and under heavy pressure, resisted the attacks until reinforcements arrived from the second column, led by Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond IV, and other leaders. The arrival of these reinforcements changed the course of the battle, and the Seljuk Turks were defeated. The victory at Dorylaeum allowed the Crusaders to continue their advance towards Antioch, and significantly weakened Muslim resistance in Asia Minor. The Siege of Antioch, October 1097, June 1098. After crossing Asia Minor and overcoming the Taurus Mountains, the Crusaders reached Antioch, one of the most important cities in the Near East and key on their way to Jerusalem. The Siege of Antioch was one of the most dramatic events of the First Crusade, lasting from October 1097 to June 1098. Antioch was a well-defended fortress surrounded by imposing walls. The long siege exhausted the Crusaders, who suffered from hunger, disease, and constant attacks from the Muslims. During this period, relations between the Crusader leaders also began to become strained due to hardships and lack of supplies. In May 1098, a Muslim army under Kerboga, the governor of Mosul, marched on Antioch to lift the siege. Just before their arrival, one of the Crusaders, Bohemond, managed to convince an Armenian guard inside the city to betray her, allowing the Crusaders to enter Antioch on June 3, 1098. However, immediately after taking the city, the Crusaders found themselves besieged inside Antioch by Kerboga's forces. At this critical moment, Peter Bartholomew, a Crusader monk, claimed to have discovered the Holy Lance, the spear that had pierced Christ during the crucifixion, rekindling the spirit of the Crusaders. Finally, on June 28, 1098, the Crusaders marched out of Antioch and defeated Kerboga's forces, securing the city and consolidating their control in the region. The capture of Jerusalem, June 7th, July 15th, 1099. After the conquest of Antioch, the Crusaders rested for several months, but the final goal of the expedition was still pending: Jerusalem. In June 1099, the Crusaders, now numbering about 12,000 soldiers, finally reached the gates of the Holy City. The siege of Jerusalem was brief but intense. The Crusaders lacked resources and faced stifling weather in the middle of summer, but religious motivation drove them. Unable to effectively besiege the city due to a lack of siege engines, the Crusaders, with the help of Genoese craftsmen, built makeshift siege towers. On July 15, 1099, after days of intense fighting, the Crusaders managed to penetrate the walls of Jerusalem. What followed was an indiscriminate massacre of the city's Muslim and Jewish population. Contemporary accounts describe rivers of blood in the streets of Jerusalem, while the Crusaders thanked God for their victory. Consequences of the First Crusade. The First Crusade culminated in the successful conquest of Jerusalem and the creation of several Crusader states, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem, ruled by Godfrey of Bouillon, who was named Defender of the Holy Sepulchre, although he rejected the title of king. These Crusader states would be the epicenter of the struggle between Muslims and Christians in the following years. The success of the First Crusade marked the beginning of a long period of conflict in the Holy Land and the establishment of a Christian presence in the Levant that would last for almost 2 centuries. Military religious orders that participated in the Crusades. During the First Crusade, the military religious orders that would later play a fundamental role in the Crusades and in the defense of the conquered territories in the Holy Land did not yet formally exist. However, after the success of the First Crusade, several military and religious orders emerged that were created with the aim of protecting pilgrims, defending holy places, and fighting against Muslims in the region. This video has already spread quite a bit. If we get enough likes and at least 200 new subscribers, we will create another video where we will tell you in detail about the religious military orders. The Knights Templar, the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, Knights Hospitaller, the Teutonic Order, and we will also include what happened during the People's Crusade, led by Peter the Hermit. What are you waiting for? Share this video with your friends, ask them to subscribe to the channel, and give it a like. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you want us to cover a specific topic, please write it in the comments. Give this video a like and share it so your family and friends can also learn about the First Crusade. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. And don't miss our recommended video at the end. You will enjoy it. Never forget, history is the imitator of time, the repository of actions, the witness of the past, the example and warning of the present, the caution for the future.